Fernando Alonso is back in Formula One and back with Renault for a third time. Ed Straw and Scott Mitchell are here to talk with me about a move that is either unbelievable or utterly predictable, depending on your take on it. And Ed, I think the key question here is, why are Alonso and Renault getting back together for a third time?
Well, Renault needed a superstar driver to replace the outgoing Daniel Ricciardo. Fernando Alonso needed to get back into Formula One in a team that was at least good enough to show that he still had it. I don't think they'd be either's first choice. If Renault had its choice of drivers, it would be signing a Max Verstappen or a Lewis Hamilton. They don't have that position in the market. If Fernando Alonso was choosing, he'd be dropping in at a Mercedes, a Red Bull, or even a Ferrari. He doesn't command that power. So it's a marriage of convenience. They need each other. It's not the ideal circumstances, but it's one of those things that could work. For Renault, they get a good driver who's very positive for them on the commercial side as well. For Alonso, he can show he's still got it. That's what he'll be thinking.
And that's the key thing, isn't it, Scott? Both parties need to get something out of this, and the main thing there is success. But how likely is it that this relationship is going to work this time around?
I think it's probably got more chance of working from a Renault point of view than it does Alonso, because while Alonso will bring a lot of pressure to that organisation, and you know, it's already on very thin ice in terms of achieving its objectives. Renault is meant to be a serious manufacturer, so you can't keep hiding by just putting sort of second-rate drivers in the car, which is a route they could have gone down if they wanted to avoid the spotlight. So Renault has to front up and put a top-line operator in the car. So Alonso gives them that. He'll give them a bit of direction. He'll give them the experience and skill that he's renowned for. So from Renault's point of view, I can see it working, because I'm pretty sure that even Fernando out of the car for a couple of years, once he gets back into the swing of things, he'll be an absolute great again. So for Renault, yeah, I think it does work. For Alonso, I don't see it, because it seems that he's going back to F1 in exactly the same position that he left it in when he said that he felt that he couldn't be challenged there anymore and needed a new motivation elsewhere. And we know he'd grown frustrated with sniping for decent points finishes in the midfield. So I always thought that Alonso wasn't going to be in F1 for the sake of it, and it kind of feels like this is almost being in F1 for the sake of it, because Renault's not going to be more than just a midfield team in 2021, and it needs to do what it's failed to do over the last 2 or 3 years to make that step for 2022. So it feels like Alonso is taking a bit of a gamble, and I don't personally think he will get what he wants out of this, which is a car that's capable of fighting for wins and titles.
I think Alonso can make it work even if the Renault doesn't deliver to the level that's hoped. Obviously, 2022 is the key year here. New rules. The hope is that this team with great potential and resource, manufacturer team, will catapult to the front, win races, fight for the championship. But Alonso, that's one of the positive outcomes for him. That's the easiest outcome. But he also needs to show he's still got it. It's not necessarily only a success for him if it's successful with Renault. While he was on the sidelines for a few years, he still had that lustre of being this gold standard world championship winning driver. He was still active elsewhere. But the problem is, the longer you're away, the closer you get to being considered obsolete, out of date, too old. So even if the Renault doesn't make the progress that's hoped, the car will be good enough for him to show he can still do it, to show he's still current, so that all those question marks people would have about his age, about his sharpness, about his relevance can be allayed. It's a long shot that he'd then jump into a big team car that would be capable of challenging for the championship. But if he doesn't get back in 2021, he has zero chance of that ever happening. With Renault, there is at least some chance of that happening. So it's about keeping himself in the game. He can't afford to stand aloof and say, well, I'm brilliant and I can win the world championship, I just need the car. He's got to show that he can do what needs to be done. And I think that's why he's backing himself to make a go of it. Doesn't mean it's high probability it will work, far from it. But it's the only thing that could work.
Incredible to think that this move might be viewed by Alonso as a stepping stone to something else. I wonder how old is he going to be? How long is he going to try and stick around in F1 for? And talking of age, Scott, when this news first broke that this story was coming together and that Alonso had re-signed for Renault, there was a lot of reaction saying, why are they going for effectively an older driver when they've got their own youth development program and in the view of many fans, there are so many young drivers who deserve this chance. Do you subscribe to that theory?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it is the obvious question. What is the point of the Renault Driver Academy if they're not going to use it to put drivers in Formula One, and they don't have a customer team from 2021 where they could put a driver. They couldn't put a driver in a customer team now because McLaren would have no interest in that at all, and they're obviously not going to put them in the works team. So that it does raise that question mark. The counter argument to that is that none of the juniors are ready. Guan Yu Zhou is probably the best place, but he still needs to have a cracking year in Formula 2. And Renault obviously didn't want to wait that long with a driver like Alonso on the market. If it had a proven regular Formula 2 race winner on its books, or a Formula 2 champion or runner-up on its books, that had the super license and had a couple of days or a few days of Formula 1 testing, maybe it's a different question. Likewise, if it had access to a driver of the caliber of George Russell or somebody like that, maybe they would try to prize them away. But I think it's just realistic. You've got a blockbuster option in someone like Alonso versus some proteges that do look promising, but ultimately haven't done, say, what Russell did or what Lando Norris or Charles Leclerc did. So I don't think it's as easy as saying that Renault's completely dismissing its proteges, but I find it interesting that Ed was talking about the questions that Alonso might want to allay by coming back. Proving yourself and showing that you've got what it takes, that feels to me like someone at the start of their career should be doing, not at the end. And with Alonso, he's a two-time world champion. He hasn't stood on an F1 podium, I don't think, since 2014. He's not won a race since 2013. I think this is the sort of thing where an F1 chance in a manufacturer like Renault should be the springboard for somebody, not someone who's been away for a couple of years and is worried that he's going to be remembered for negative reasons, or he's not being talked about enough, or something like that. It's the sort of thing that it should be a stepping stone in someone's legacy, not someone fighting to keep hold of it.
Now, Ed, Scott mentioned track time there for younger drivers, but this is relevant for Alonso as well. And when you've had 2 years away, how important is that actually going to be for Alonso?
I think a driver of his experience who's still been racing elsewhere at the highest level, it won't take too much for him to get back into it, but he will need a little bit of preparation just to make sure he hits the ground running. Doubly so given that pre-season testing next year is going to be so restricted. Renault has the advantage of these old cars it can run. They had the 2018 cars out at the Red Bull Ring not so long ago in preparation for this season. So they do have the capacity to give him really as much track time as they can afford and he needs. I don't think it'll need a huge amount, but he's only done, 1 day in a Formula 1 car in a McLaren in Bahrain last year, over 2 years if he doesn't get in a car this year. So I think it's important for them just to find that sharpness. And you never know, they could have the chance to bolt on an FP1 session or two later in the season. That possibility remains.